Art Nouveau as a style is customarily thought of as having been one of history's tightly locked boxes. In the case of Art Nouveau, it will undoubtedly be a beautiful, finely crafted, gilded box. But a box nevertheless. Art Nouveau architecture is not short of admirers, and people come from far and wide to see its masterpieces, but they stare at its works, feeling them to be detached in time and history. We expect never to see their like old-fashioned again. However, the assessment of Art Nouveau, like that of any art movement, is never static. We may finally move on from Nicholas Pevner's judgment in 1936 that it was a short but very significant fashion and decoration. But still the feeling lingers that the demise of Art Nouveau was attributable to some fundamental internal flaws. Art Nouveau was international style. It had regional variations but contained a unity of purpose that is unmistakable from country to country. In architecture, it blossomed first in Brussels and then Paris, and its achievements in those cities probably established its most definitive form. From there, it appeared in Spain, Scotland, Italy, Hungary, and other countries in the heart of Europe. It also reached a periphery, Finland, Latvia, Russia. Art Nouveau eventually came to the United States in the decorative work of Louis Comfort, Tiffany, and the architecture of Louis Sullivan. To truly understand any architectural style, you have to see it in its context. And if you do this thoroughly with Art Nouveau, it shakes off the accusation of lack of robustness. It was born into the febrile atmosphere of the late 19th century, when the new confidence in science and rationalism fought and doubt pessimism about the direction of civilization interjected into what was a powerful movement in much painting, poetry, literature, philosophy toward anti-rationalism of one sort or another. At the same time, particularly dangerous gingerism was on the rise with accompanying demands of austerity and conformity. A radical new style, especially a flamboyant one with a clearly subversive stance, had to have had solid underpinnings to emerge at all. Within its contemporary Milo, Art Nouveau sided with the anti-rationalists and did so to the consent that Pevsner, in a fuller assessment in 1773, titled the book he edited on the subject of anti-rationalists and the rationalists, identification with anti-rationalism left Art Nouveau open to attack from both the supporters of the new determinist scientific outlook and the prophets of the degenerate doom. The great intellectual event of the last half of the 19th century was undoubtedly the arrival of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. This taught that life was propelled by accidental mutations that are then sifted through survival through competition. The big idea resulted in a division between those who embraced mechanistic view of life as it proposed to others, and others who saw it as insecurity of direction whereby things could go badly and easily they could go well. On one side, T.H. Huxley said confidently in 1867 that zoological physiology regards animal bodies as machines impelled by forces, which can be expressed in terms of the ordinary forces of nature. On the other, the prevalent fears of degeneracy were vividly expressed in Max Nordau's Book of Degenerations, 1892. Unsettled by Darwin's view of undirected evolution, he recognized a morbid deviation from the original type. Among such deviants, he singled out the fin de cycle art movements, and notes that the diagnosis degeneration is applicable to the originators of the new aesthetic tendencies. He sees that a mental stigma of much degenerates is their emotionalism. They feel the bliss of the beautiful possessing them to the tips of their fingers. Nordau's views were widely read and no doubt contributed to the popularity of the strident nationalism, found almost everywhere in Europe then, that promised certainty of direction. Against these currents, a number of artistic movements and theories in the 1880s developed in a more optimistic direction, all of which consciously sought the creation of modern world. All these movements fed into the emergence of Art Nouveau in the 1890s and formed most of its formal sources, helping to generate style or the look of Art Nouveau. Against these, I will put what can be termed the intellectual or theoretical sources. The appreciation of both formal and intellectual sources is crucial to the understanding of the real meaning of Art Nouveau. Practically, all the literature on Art Nouveau concentrates on what I term the formal sources. The effect of this limitation is to encourage a view of Art Nouveau as purely a style or even, to use Pevsner's word, a fashion. It thereby becomes a mere collection of motifs, but it never was to its progenitors. By dwelling only on its superficial form, we ensure that Art Nouveau remains trapped in a historical box. As a consequence, we deny it the possibility of having any bearing architecture and design today. However, by releasing profound ideas that lay behind Art Nouveau, we can return to today's debate about how we might build. I will briefly describe the formal sources of Art Nouveau: the aesthetic movement, the arts and crafts movement, symbolism art, the structural theories of Eugene Viollet-le-Duc, and the contemporary neo-Baroque architecture, before considering the intellectual sources. Although England never developed an Art Nouveau movement, it was universally recognized by early exponents of Art Nouveau and the continent as a primary place of influence. The aesthetic movement was primarily responsible. That movement can be located, roughly, in the decade preceding that of Art Nouveau, that is, the 1880s. Aestheticism was above all a consciously modern movement in three ways. First, it built upon the ideas of John Ruskin, William Morris on how to create a style that was free from the numerous historical styles encompassed by the contemporary eclecticism. Second, it favored the simplicity of design, and it took that much from Japanese prints. It was latter's asymmetry, striking pattern making, and balance between detailed figuration and blank areas that impressed the makers of the aesthetic movement. Third, aestheticism rejected the standard messages such as patriotism, glory, and pity that conventional art and architecture were expected to convey. Its slogan of art for art's sake proclaimed a dismissal of such values and said that the work of art contained its own message. Only beauty itself mattered. Art for art's sake immediately got the government into trouble. For if beauty were the only thing that mattered, where were God and morality? Oscar Wilde was one of its most foremost advocates on either side of the Atlantic. He may not have served the movement well, as his bold statements failed to account in advance for the inevitable reaction. In one of his lectures, he said, "Nor in its primary aspect has painting any more spiritual message for us than a blue tile. It is a beautifully colored surface, nothing more, and affects us by no suggestion stolen from philosophy, no pathos pilfered from literature, no feeling filched from a poet, but its own incommunicable artistic essence." Art Nouveau inherited the fresh, radical vision of the aesthetic movement, but with that came its sense of immorality and decadence. One of the movement's best architects, E.W. Godwin, built a series of houses in Chelsea, London, that were very close to being Art Nouveau. The second formal influence of Art Nouveau was the arts and crafts movement, which again sprang from England. Art Nouveau took from its ideas of the truth to the materials and abandonments of historically based designs. Arts and crafts was, of course, related to the aesthetic movement, but substituted the latter's somewhere foppish style for seriousness of purpose associated with the genuine desire for social movement and reform along the lines of Ruskin laid down. Morris was the immediate inspiration of arts and crafts and certain visual elements that had a direct influence on Art Nouveau. In particular, his wallpaper and fabric patterns fed into its way of representing nature, as his designs suggested a freedom from stylization together with a strong feeling of the live, growing organisms that Art Nouveau would seek. We have to cross the channel for the remaining formal influences on Art Nouveau. Symbolism, like Art Nouveau after it started in Paris, Brussels, Axis, it stands out as a reaction to Huxley's kind of philosophy of mechanism, for it seeks to investigate a reality behind the appearance of scientific analysis. In this, it is surely otherworldly, but rarely aligned with any of the many religious and mystical cults generating inherent sin. It preferred to express this reality wholly within the artistic realm. Michel Foucault writes, "For a work to be considered symbolist, its purpose must be something other than what is actually represented. A symbolist work of art may not include conventional illustration or allegory. As its aestheticism, the symbolists expose themselves to accusations of amorality, sickness, and decadence, prompting a contemporary writer to observe that. Their vision has always been somewhat feverish, with the diseased sharpness of overexcited nerves." Formerly, symbolism contributed to Art Nouveau's swirling motives, eroticism, and a lack of conventional representation, as you see on Jan Torp's O Grove, Where Is Thy Victory? Perhaps more important, the intellectual concepts of symbolism laid the foundation for an anti-mechanistic approach that lets architects imagine buildings as more than utilitarian vessels for human activity or embodiments of received morality. Architecture could become charged with anti-rationalism and moral freedom, and hold up a broader conception of human values than prevailing materialism. Fourth, the influence of the ideas of Viollet-le-Duc should not be underestimated, for it is their integration into the realization of Art Nouveau buildings that allowed the style to move beyond mere artifice and decoration. Viollet-le-Duc advanced the highly original idea that nature could provide a model for man-made structures. In this sense, he proclaimed that to be a functionalist, his published designs show how plant forms can lend themselves to buildings. Crucial to this narrative was the use of iron because it could achieve the tensile strength and rigidity of fibrous plant tissue. Victor Horta, a pioneer of Art Nouveau's architecture, demonstrated that structural iron could be fashioned into plant forms with no sense of forcing an argument, and in the process created a fluidity and harmony between vegetative forms and buildings. The last formal source of Art Nouveau was the style in which its architects were primarily trained, and that was practiced extensively in the new boulevards of the major cities of Europe. The Neo-Baroque style had come a long way since its invention by Bernini in Rome in the 1620s. I would define Baroque architecture as the exaggeration and manipulation of the elements of classical architecture for the sake of total theatrical effect. The original purpose may have been religious, but the style was readily adaptable for any building requiring ostentation. It is relevant to Art Nouveau because it achieved its drama by merging classical forms with the natural and human forms. For instance, voluptuous human figures were placed in appetitive structural roles as Atlantes, terms and masks, while rampant foliage and flowers invaded the details. This compromising of form with organic elements became an essential component for Art Nouveau. These formal sources were all in place before the first Art Nouveau building, Victor Horta's Tasselhaus in Brussels. Others followed so quickly and spontaneously over such a large geographical area that there must have been a like-minded artistic and intellectual movement already in place. To appreciate how and why this happened, we need to add the formal sources, the intellectual sources of the time. The anti-rationalism of the late 19th century was partly a reaction against the austere, positive philosophy, exemplified by Huxley, who regarded animal bodies and plants as machines. So the means by which, for instance, an acorn becomes the oak tree would someday no longer be an unfathomable miracle of nature, but a series of mechanical, analyzable processes. One aspect of this reaction was artistic, poetic expression, such as symbolism, but philosophers and scientists also can frame a mechanism on its own terms. Notable among these was Hans Driesch, a genetical biologist who, having made important discoveries in cell research, turned to philosophy, where he became a strong anti-mechanist. The creation of new cells by division was already known. Driesch asked, how could a machine be divided innumerable times and yet remain what it was? Refuting Huxley, he objected that, because a few things were really understood on account of the delicate structures have been recognized, it was thought that everything must be comprehensible on the same grounds. Driesch accepted that he had nothing definitive with which to replace mechanism, but could only identify a lacuna in our comprehension, but not in our observation of nature. We can see that organisms grow from within, and so we may put a name to the cause driving in this process, vital force, hence the doctrine of vitalism. Driesch explained that by vitalism we mean the possibility, merely negative at first, that there may be processes in the organism which are not machine-like or mechanistic type. Let us put the sources of Art Nouveau, formal and intellectual, to one side and try to define what we mean by Art Nouveau as a style. Let us do this on the basis of observation, looking at an Art Nouveau building and attempting to say what marks it as differently from a building in any other style. What strikes us about the Casa Batlló in Barcelona by Antonio Gaudí and Casset is that the whole building seems to be taken over and subsumed by plant forms, suggesting a transformation of inert into organic material. What is depicted? Metamorphosis of building elements becoming plant-like, or human-made geometric form becoming natural form. We see vital impulse in nature taking command. I would define the resulting style this way. Art Nouveau invents a new modern architectural type, the elements of which suggest a metamorphosis of inert architectural form into living, growing, and plant forms.